Hello and welcome to my Innovation Story podcast, where you get exclusive insights into the journeys of amazing innovators across the African continent. I'm Femi Awoniyi, and today we have a very exciting guest. His name is Tomiwa Aladekomo. Now, for those who may not know, Tomiwa is the CEO of Big Cabal Media, which publishes youth and tech publications, TechCabal and Zikoko. Tomiwa, it's a pleasure to have you join us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Thank you. So you're actually one of the more exciting people I know in the ecosystem for many reasons. I'll come to reasons why. But we at My Innovation Story, we actually believe that who you are today is actually a byproduct of some of your earlier stories. So let's wind the clock back to Tomiwa at 5 years old.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about your story, how you grew up, your upbringing, just anything around the circumstances of growing up for you?
Interesting. It's a new question, actually. At 5, I was only 2 years. I'd only been in Lagos for 2 years. I spent my first 3 years in Malaysia. Yeah, I'm a good Ijesha boy. So I spent my first 3 years in Malaysia. My mom was finishing school at University of Lagos. My dad was carrying his company in his briefcase, running all around Lagos, trying to get it started. And so Ijesha is actually my first language. So there's a fact that, I had to learn English after I moved to Lagos. And for a time, I was a blazing star in that I could speak fluent Ijesha, fluent Yoruba, and fluent English. Now I speak passable Yoruba and almost no Ijesha.
Like this.
So I moved to Lagos with my parents. My dad started a company called Chams, which is now listed on the NGX, but which at the time was, a briefcase company. And so I guess in terms of my first exposure to innovation, my dad was, sort of the first example of that. And we started out in a self-contained distillery, the three of us in a little room, and I still remember that space, interesting enough. And so I do kind of an understanding of innovation and entrepreneurship as this thing that requires grit, of making big things out of nothing. And I really watched my dad sort of build the company. Like, I remember every office they went to, from he's doing this in his briefcase to this small place, then moved around the corner, onto Akerele Street, and then from Akerele Street moved to VI. And so I watched my father's kind of journey as an innovator and as an entrepreneur. And also, I'm the first son of 4 kids. And also got over time to watch sort of like the highs and the lows, and to see when they succeeded, beyond their expectations, and then when the market or Nigeria or government or whatever it is challenged them in crazy ways. And I've been privileged to sort of like see that journey, to see the level of grit it requires to stand up when you're taking real blows, to innovate. So CHAM stands for Computer Hardware and Maintenance Services. And literally, when my dad started it, they were one of the only companies that would help you maintain a computer after you bought it. So they would buy computers and supply them to people, but they'd maintain it as well. Because at that time, you'd buy your computer and nobody else serviced it. You were just on your own. So you think about that era of, that's what was IT at the time, and they've evolved into being sort of like a payments company, into a switch, into, they started out doing maintenance, and then went to wide area networks, then identity cards. So again, from an innovation perspective, the idea that where you start is not where you end. It's a long journey, and you have to constantly move as technology moves, as the market moves, to find opportunities that may not be obvious. And so I'd say in my journey as an innovator and entrepreneur, I was privileged to have that front row seat.
That's actually very interesting, because you raise a good point about moving with the times.
Yes.
And I'd like to double down there to ask, how did that experience, and especially the close exposure you had to your dad as an entrepreneur, how did that shape your passion for digital innovation? Because it's one thing to see it, but it's another thing for it to leave a spark. So I'm just wondering how that left an impression on you.
So, I mean, I had relatively early exposure to computers because that's what he did. And I think we probably had one at home by the time I was maybe 9 or so. There was a computer at home. So relatively early exposure, went to secondary school, decent amount of exposure to computers. I don't think I ever intended it to be my line of work. It's interesting, my career has mostly been media. And I've been all up and down the media landscape. I've worked in events, I've worked in advertising, I've worked in record labels, I've worked in newspapers. So I've gone all through the media landscape, and it's interesting that I've ended up in this space, which is very tech adjacent and sort of working quite closely to the tech ecosystem. I run a company that's venture backed. But for most of my career, if you asked me what I was, I would say I'm a media man. But I'll tell you a moment that was interesting was I'd come out of running an events business here in Lagos for about 4 years, and we had our highs. We built a fantastic jazz festival, we did fantastic concerts, Asha, Neka, Keziah Jones, a bunch of interesting people like that. We could never stabilize it as a business. It just could never, you'd have periods where you'd be doing amazing things for 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, and then you'd have 9 months of just nothing. Too seasonal, too dependent on sponsors, just too dependent on too many things outside of your control. And so I was done with that. And there was a job opening for head of digital at Nigerian breweries.
Okay.
And I'd been talking to a recruiter, and so he put my CV on there. And I didn't meet the recruiter until actually after I got the job, but when I met him, he said, when I put your CV on the pile, everybody was like, what are you doing? There were, CVs of some guy who had been head of digital, Unilever, head of digital at other FMCG companies. So their profiles made sense for the role.
Yeah.
Mine didn't. My CV makes no sense. If you're on LinkedIn and you look at it, it's the resume of a person that has no direction. But I went for that interview, and maybe I learned about it on Wednesday. The interview was on Friday, so I did some reading up.
Okay.
All right, going for an interview. Let's make sure that's
brush up.
Yeah, let's brush up. But I got the job on the basis of the fact that I've always been interested in innovation. I've always been interested in what's happening in tech and in digital, and I was fully up to speed on what was happening in there. And so I was competing against people who had been doing this as a role.
Yeah.
But my understanding of the space, my comfort with what it is that was happening, my sense of what it is that Nigerian breweries should be doing strategically at that time was pretty solid. And so I'd say that's the influence, even in coming into Big Cabal and running TechCabal. It requires me, and I'm not a reporter, so I'm not writing on a daily basis about this, but I have to represent the publication. And so, I have to have a comfort with what is happening in the tech space and a deep understanding of it. And it's a space that is interesting to me and that I'm passionate about. And so, without having, I'm not a coder, I'm not a product manager, but I've spent enough time immersed in it that I tend to stay on top of it. It's something that I'm comfortable with. It's a space that I'm comfortable with.
That's really awesome. So I'd like to stay on this topic of innovation within media, because when a lot of people think of innovation, media isn't the first thing they come up with.
Okay.
So I'd like to get your perspective on this. What are some of the ways that you've been able to drive innovation from a media perspective, having been at, Big Cabal for quite some time?
So I think innovation, first of all, applies across industries.
Okay.
If you are a cashew farmer, you should be innovating all day, every day. And I mean, and innovation applies across a range of steps. So it's in how do you grow the cashews? It's in how do you package it? It's how do you go to market? What's your go-to-market strategy? It's in how do you collect your money? So I don't think innovation is sort of domain only of tech.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that media is one of the most underinvested space. Is a grossly underinvested space in Africa. I said one of the most, and then there are a lot of underinvested spaces in Africa. But I think media is grossly underinvested. There's a lot of white spaces where important media verticals should sit, and nobody's done work in them. And so I think the opportunity and the privilege I've had with Big Cabal is to be able to take at least a couple of those spaces and do new and interesting and exciting things in those spaces. And so we publish 2 publications at the moment. TechCabal, which covers the business and the impact of technology in Africa. We've been doing it for 10 years. And we also publish Zikoko. Zikoko is a youth publication focused on all the things that young people are passionate about in Nigeria. Zikoko is probably about 7 years old now. So where have we been able to innovate? TechCabal started out covering Yaba. And I've said this before. We didn't start out covering tech in Lagos. We didn't start out covering tech in Nigeria or Africa. Bankole, who's the founder of the publication, was hanging around in Yaba. He was tired of writing iPhone reviews in August when the iPhone reached Nigeria until November. And he was meeting all these interesting people in Yaba who were starting companies, hanging out at CC Hub or at one Suya joints down the street. And he thought the work they were doing was interesting and worth covering. And so that's where TechCabal came from, was literally asking young, interesting people, why are you doing this thing? And so from an innovation perspective, I think one of the first things we've done is just broaden the conversation, broaden the scope. As tech in Africa has grown and become a lot more robust, we've grown with it. Our ambitions have grown with it. And so we've gone from covering Yaba to covering Lagos to covering Nigeria to covering the continent quite robustly.
Amazing.
We've built a business. So business innovation is super important. And that is, how do you actually make money from media? Extremely difficult.
Yeah, not
Hard
easy.
work.
Not easy.
Hard work. I think what's interesting is we've grown in one of the most difficult periods for media globally, one of the most difficult periods for digital media globally. And so I think one of the things that makes it exciting for us is that we have a front row seat to experiment at the same pace as all the global players. And so the New York Times may be succeeding at what it is that they're doing right now, but 10 years ago, there was no guarantee that the plan that the New York Times had laid out was going to work. BuzzFeed, Complex, Refinery 29, Vox Media, Group 9, any one of these media groups, from across the world, they've all experimented. Some of them have succeeded. Some of them are in bankruptcy right now, some of them. And so we've had the opportunity to sort of experiment on a business model basis at the same time as they have. And it's been a fascinating journey. It's been a tough journey. But it's been an exciting one. And so, we make our money via advertising. Events are a big part of our revenue mix. We've experimented with subscriptions. We have a consulting business, which serves as data and research and a range of projects like that. We have a content creation studio. And so if there's a revenue model that exists for digital media, we've definitely considered it at some point. We may not have implemented because we decided it was the wrong time or the wrong model for us, but we've contemplated it. We've experimented with a range of different things, always keeping in mind the need to sort of grow and to push really hard.
Mm-hmm.
We've innovated on content. I talked about, I think TechCabal, has gone through a range of different phases, from being very news heavy to being very analysis heavy to being more opinion led. And these days, we are one of the most important news sources for what is happening in technology. We're one of the most authoritative sources, if not the most authoritative source on what is happening in technology in Africa. We innovate and experiment with formats. So our newsletters are a super important sort of format for us. We've done some video. We've done a lot of work in video, a lot of interesting video formats. We've done some podcast experimentation. Not everything we've done has stuck, but we've experimented with that. Events. if it exists, we've tried it. And we've done interesting things with them. We've succeeded wildly on some fronts, and other times we've quietly shut down an experiment, On the Zikoko end, Zikoko is one of the most amazing publications. Like, it definitely is a pleasure and a privilege to work on Zikoko. When I joined Big Cabal, Zikoko was listicles and quizzes.
Okay.
We were patterned after BuzzFeed. So we launched Zikoko, I believe, in 2016. I joined Big Cabal, took over as CEO in 2018. And it was clear, that format was a little bit dull. It wasn't enough anymore. And so I remember working with the team at that time. Fuad Lawal was kind of editor-in-chief and leading the charge. But a lot of other brilliant people on the team at the time. Toketemu, Korti was on our team. Just lots of interesting people. And there was this long period of experimentation where there was a phrase I used to use, wanted to touch the cultural nerve. We wanted to touch everything that was important to young people, to be the most important publication, sort of speaking to what young people cared about. And so we'd be experimenting. We'd be doing our listicles and our quizzes, where we'd experiment with the formats and with the form. And I would write Fuad these long screeds about how we're not getting it yet, we need to try more. And we'd experiment with video formats and with written formats until Fuad launched Naira Life. And I remember it was some long screed, and he just kind of went home in a huff and spent the weekend and came back on Monday and was like, here's your new thing, I think he launched at 9 a.m. on the Monday morning, and it was an immediate hit. It's one of those things that's amazing when you do something and everybody's like, yep, that's the thing. That's the one we were waiting for. That's a great feeling. And that was Naira Life. And Naira Life kind of set the tone. It was anonymous interviews of people about money. A bit like this interview, we'd go, what was your first experience with money? How do you save? How do you spend? Are you anxious about money? Are you comfortable with it? All of that. And once that started, it kind of set the tone for us to then dig really deeply and honestly into a range of different topics about young people. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? Women want to tell that nobody else is telling. What does it mean to be queer in Nigeria? What does it mean? What are your relationships like? We had a long-running column called Sex Life, just digging into people's sex lives and relationships and not in prurient ways, but really trying to understand what's meaningful to people, really trying to tell stories that few other people tell. And I think that at the heart of innovation is a bit of restlessness, is one, trying to create the most interesting work possible, so that you spend a lot of time at work. It would be nice for it to be meaningful. It would be nice for the work that you do to have meaning in the world. So that, and then from a business perspective, hey, we're trying to make a living. We're trying to build a business that lasts, that has impact, that can afford to pay everybody to live in a lifestyle that would be all right. And so the innovation is around that. How do you make enough money? Again, making money in media is very difficult. So you're thinking, how do we build a robust business around this? How do we make sure the content that we're creating actually has an impact in the world? How do we differentiate ourselves from everything that's out there? And so that restlessness, sort of just never getting comfortable with what it is that you do, always knowing that there's more, there's better, there's another level. I think that's a big motivator. Yeah.
It's, as we were speaking, a couple of things came to mind. The first being this notion of experimentation around experimenting on the kind of content you want to do, experimenting on different revenue models. I was at Moonshots. It was a great event, by the way. Well done. And just experimenting at almost the different ways that you can extract meaningful value from the people that are around you, right? I want to touch on that point of innovation, but I want to move it towards people a little bit, because you started talking about the people who have made this happen. So first of all, the people within the firm, and also the lives that you're writing about, right? So a little bit of a tangent. Looking at people specifically, let's go back to your earlier days when you were just about to make your decision to join Big Cabal. What do you think were some of the key elements that were gotten right with the relationship you had with the founders, right? To say, you know what, I'm going to join. Because I would imagine that a lot of people are in this situation, both on the founder side and on the CEO side, where they're thinking through whether to make the jump or whether to join, or they have and it didn't go well, right? So I'm trying to use it as an opportunity to educate people who are kind of in a similar position. What would you say about that?
So transitions from a founder-led team to a CEO-led team, or from founders to whatever other kind of team, are tricky. They're really, really difficult. I think the first thing that made it work was a real alignment between the founders and I in terms of what the opportunity with Big Cabal was. I thought they built something brilliant. I loved the publications before I joined. And so, I really believed in the mission. And it's really interesting because I've been here almost 6 years now, working on this almost 6 years. And there are some days, if I look at the template of what it is that we're building, it's the same thing that they were trying to do in 2014. So, it's 10 years later and the mission hasn't changed dramatically, So that alignment was really good. A deep respect helps. And so on both sides. So someone's handing you their baby. They really have to trust that you're going to treat it with respect. They really have to trust that you are the right person. There's a lot of faith that is required on both sides. You are taking something from them. You got to trust that they're not going to sabotage it. They're not going to come back and, and claw it back, or, you're going to sink in time, energy, your own money into it. It requires a lot of faith on this part of the person coming in. Good lawyers. Good lawyers are a valuable part of this process because, all's fair love and war, and you want to make sure that if it goes wrong, you're protected on both sides. So yes, hire good lawyers and pay them well. Pay them well, whatever you can, but hire good lawyers. So that helped. And I, Shay, who was founder and CEO of the publication, is who I started the conversation with about joining Big Cabal. And when we were done, he stepped out as CEO because we didn't want the confusion of CEOs in the business. If people have thought of you as a CEO, it's very hard to shift you into a different position. And that's probably a lesson, is you don't want any obvious power clashes inside the business. But yeah, it was an interesting negotiation process and challenging at times. Again, it's emotional to let go of something that you spend years of your life building and working on. But ultimately, I think he trusted that, look, this guy can do it, and he hands off. Bankole stayed on and worked. And he and I worked together for another 2 years. He's still on our board. And again, for Bankole was, he was out the door. He was backpacking in East Africa, and I had to convince him to come back to Nigeria and rejoin the team and give another 2 years of his life to this experiment that had already, claimed 4 years of his life. And even though we had done, it's similar to my events business, you've done amazing things. People are this is a great publication. I think they'd already done Radar. Radar was a key part of the tech ecosystem. People really valued it. But it's not paying my bills. It's not working from a finance and a business perspective, and we're losing hair and time. So it took a lot of faith from Bankole in my ability to turn things around, and in the business, and in the possibility of the business, to come back. And then we spent 2 years, and I think again we built a lot of really incredible things, and we pushed really hard, innovated on all fronts. It's how to make enough money to keep this thing going, how to raise money, and convince people that, well, you've already given us some cash, but come back in, give us more, give us more. And then on the content front, just like, and Bankole, mad scientist, it's just like, here's this crazy thing we could do, and here's that crazy thing we could do. And I think when it comes to my skill set is saying, oh, that's a great, crazy thing, putting some structure around it and putting some execution around it and figuring out how to make some money from it. So like a lot of the team, until tomorrow, a lot of BCM is crazy, wild ideas coming from within the team, from outside the team, and us looking at it and going, yeah, it'd be wild to do that. It'd be really cool to do that. How do we make money from it? How do we make sure, it doesn't wear out the team entirely in executing it while keeping going our daily content grind and all of that. And so, yeah, I think that's every day at Big Cabal. Wake up, let's do some crazy stuff. Let's figure out how to do it without it bankrupting us and hopefully making a return that, makes this a promising business for our investors.
That's awesome. Firstly, I have to say the skill you just mentioned, which is taking crazy and wild ideas and putting some structure to make sure that it makes money while keeping the ship afloat. I actually think that's a very essential skill to have, especially within the creative space, because creatives tend to have a little bit of
wild ideas. Wouldn't it be cool? Yes. It would be cool if you don't starve.
Like having a balance.
It is. There's let me hop in. There's a Gary Vaynerchuk interview I once heard, and he talked about being an operator, and he talked about the fact that crypto or whatever crazy idea it is, it's like it's a year, 2, 3 years too early, and in the interim between when you are like, oh, that's the next cool thing, and when that thing actually blows, you gotta pay a team, you gotta make a living, you gotta keep the business afloat. And he talks about like the thing that allows him to bridge that gap are his skills as an operator. And so every time I'm on a panel or an interview or whatever it is, I say this to creative people, I say this to people in the media, it is a business. You've got to take care of the business. I think lots of creative people want to do the cool creative stuff, but don't have the skills in terms of, figuring out how to monetize. Don't invest the time and energy into understanding the business. And the thing I say to them is that if you look at the best creatives, the people that you're like, that's the coolest person in the world, they're great at the business. Michael Jackson, like a phenomenal business person. Beyonce, great business person. Kanye, crazy as shit, but a really good business person. Jay-Z, artists that you care about, if their work has global impact for a sustained period of time, it's because they get the business right. And I'd say I've learned, because I just kind of slogged through a dozen different jobs in a dozen different industries, and I had the opportunity to I remember, like I told you, I ran a business and it just didn't make any money for 4 years, or any consistent money. We made some money, but it just wasn't consistent. And I remember kind of like identifying what are the problems. And one of the big problems was I'd moved to Nigeria, done 1 year of NYSC, and then started my own business. I didn't have a decent understanding of the way business is done here. I didn't have a deep enough network of my own, of people who rated me and wanted to work with me, or would support me, or would give me work because they'd worked with me previously. And so I identified that as like one of the things I need to fix is I just need to have a better understanding of how business works in Nigeria. So I'll go work for a big company. Nigerian Breweries hired me. Thank you, Nigerian Breweries. 2.5 years there of, working with people in media, working with people in technology, working with FMCG people, and building a bit of a reputation for myself. And so I picked up one set of skills. After that, I went and worked for a small digital agency, and I chose to work there because, I really liked the guy who was running it, brilliant guy, and I thought I could learn a lot about running a business from him, and I did. Spent 2 years there, did a lot of incredible work, got to work with The Guardian, got to work with a great team, did everything: hiring, firing, compensation, negotiations with clients, the elements of how to bill people and how to, billing. Like billing is an art, like figuring out how to price your products and how to convince somebody to actually give you the money that you're worth. And so you got to learn that stuff. And everybody learns it in their own way, in different ways. Some people just have a great instinctual skill for this stuff. Other people learn it the hard way. Some people, like me, slow. To just do enough jobs, that eventually you pick up enough to do it. But I think that for creatives, for people in the media, it is critical to know, first of all, you've got to get the business right. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Like, it doesn't matter how brilliant your idea is, it doesn't matter how great your creativity, it's hard to sustain without someone. And it may not be you. Maybe you're not the business person, but then you need to find the business person nice and early, and they have to be somebody you can trust and you can meld pretty well with. But yeah, it's critical.
And you dropped a lot of nuggets that came to my mind. Quite frankly, firstly, partnering around your weaknesses.
Yes,
it's absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
Another thing that you said that is quite interesting is your experience. You went around getting a lot of the foundational skills you needed to make the business a success. One of the things I actually touched on was hiring and firing people, right? Which, it's very difficult. And people have to do and have had to do a lot of more recently, especially founders. So I actually want to touch on that point. Over the years of being an entrepreneur, and running your business and being CEO now, how would you say your perspective on hiring people and managing people has changed over the years?
I hire slower now. I've always been a talent hog. So I see talented people, I'm like, come. I think at varying points, particularly at Big Cabal, I've been guilty of overhiring. It's just like, no, I want all the talent. And especially in an environment like ours that isn't as talent rich as you might want, I'm just like, that person has talent, we'll figure out what we do with them. Just bring them in. And I've burned myself, a few times doing that. You hire talent which either you can sustain, you're not ready for, or all in all you end up with a team that is bigger than your capacity to support. I wish I could say I had learned that lesson years ago and that stuck. Unfortunately, as a business, I think we did our first layoffs ever this year, so I have had, my enthusiasm still sometimes runs away with me. So I try to hire slower. It's like, it is a difficult environment in which to find people, but there are really great people out there. I personally focus very deeply on finding people who can make a meaningful difference in our business. And that's from a creative perspective or a business perspective. Things like design are really, really important to us, and so we always have a strong design team. And so I'm always looking for the right people. But these days, I try to be a lot more disciplined, and I've built a team that enforces discipline on me, so that we only hire what we need, we only hire what we've planned properly for. And I think that's what's changed.
It's all growth, and I like how you're speaking to how you were and how you are now, having been burnt, obviously.
Firing people was never fun, for whatever reason. Firing great people because you made a business mistake, that is not. That is the worst. When you got to come to a team and you've got to say, you guys are amazing. You guys have done great work. We're letting you go not because you've fallen short, but because we as a business made a mistake. I would like to never ever have to do that again. Yeah. But sorry, just... Yeah, please. It's, I think the best companies still do it. If you look this year, the number of layoffs at global companies, at Nigerian companies, at African countries. Some of the best run companies, one of the best run companies I know just announced, they're cutting off 33 people in these markets today. And so sometimes it's just unavoidable. The market, what the market is, the economy is what the economy is. There are a lot of factors you don't control. But you do want to be as careful as possible. You don't want to be destabilizing people's lives. So
I think we've gone through many changing times. For instance, COVID-19, the rise and fall of a lot of funding that's coming into Africa.
Yep.
I'd like to ask you a question. We asked every guest this question. What would you say has been the most pivotal moment in your innovation story so far?
I mean, I think the easy answer is joining Big Cabal. That's really probably the easiest answer, because it's where I've spent the last 6 years of my life, sort of working on this project. And I think so far, in my life, I'd say it's the most meaningful work that I've done. But if I were to look for a trickier answer, my first degree was in business administration with a focus on finance. So my concentration was finance. And so I think a really pivotal moment was the point where I did a finance internship, made a lot of money, word out of my skull. And I finished that internship, went back to school the next term and started an advertising minor and decided I wasn't going to work in finance. And so that's a pivotal moment because my career would have been very, very different if I'd continued down the finance path rather than switching to advertising and media and all of that. So that's probably an early, very, very pivotal moment in my direction in life. I would have been, I'd have been bonds and stocks and on Wall Street or working as a VC, which I think the painful thing for me now is that ultimately you always come back to finance. Like I said, you've got to manage the business. So, by the time I'm speaking with investors and whatever it is, maybe I would have enjoyed this if I'd actually stayed in that space.
And I would imagine in your current role, you probably still use it.
Yeah, so I still use it, and again, you come back to it, and then it's it's like you say you want to be a musician, and then one day you're staring at spreadsheets, and you're like, this is not what we signed up for. But that's the reality of it's the reality of everything. So I still use a lot of that stuff. And then you relearn it, and you're like, right, back here again. Yeah, my old friend. Excel, pivot tables, dashboards. So much excitement.
I don't think so.
Yeah, no.
So I would like to touch on your personal story a little bit more because you seem to have gone through many facets of life. I think you've had your finance side, you tried it, said, okay, this is not what I want, and you moved away from it. And you worked in Nigerian breweries, and then you kind of pivoted a little bit, kind of decided to focus exclusively on the media space. So I want to, in your personal life, having gone through the different changes, if you could look back, what would you say was one pivotal lesson that someone who is also a creator and is bouncing around as we speak right now, because creatives tend to do that, what would you say is one lesson you'd be able to give them to help them navigate their path?
It's tricky. I think the output is everything. The output is really, I think BBDO, the ad agency used to have, I think it's BBDO, their motto was the work. And so ultimately what the world measures you by is by what you put out. And so I think for creatives, put out the best projects you can put out cohesive bodies of work. That's in music, that's whatever it is, I was talking to an actor a few years ago. He was trying to navigate his career, and I'm listen. Sure, you'll do whatever jobs come your way. You go, you audition, you do as much as you can. But if you have the opportunity, create your own work. Do the best monologue that you can and put it out there. Work with your friends to create a film that puts you at the center of it and as a star, and put a solid body of work out there. I think the one thing that you control as a creative is the work, is the output. And so I think at any given point, do what it is you can to make sure that you put out the most solid and convincing and exciting body of work that you can. And when you're done, like, park it and go and do the next one. And when you're done with that, park it and go and do the next one. Each time trying to get better than whatever it is you've done. I'd say that's the most important thing. With something like Big Cabal, where we produce content on a daily basis, it's a bit less, clear that you've done, just this one and put it down. But, for me, when we launch a new flagship, or we launch a new newsletter, and we get it right, and you can say that thing is working, the audience loves it, we've got the right team doing it, we can maintain the quality, then I can say we've done that, park it, what's the next thing that we're going to do? You mentioned Moonshot with this great conference this year, and it took tons of energy from the entire team, but we launched it, we did it, the feedback was rapturous, everyone was quite clear, like, this is major, and that was great. And we can say that's a body of work that we've put out that matters. 2023 is done, park it, let's face 2024. How do we do Moonshot and do it better? And what are the lessons we take from that for all the other work that we do to make those better? And so the work is all that matters.
Perspective on output, because it's very easy for you to get into this frame of mind of analysis paralysis, where you're creating but not finishing. And not putting things out.
Like, there's no victory without risk. There's no reward without risk, and so you've got to put yourself out. Like, create the work, put it out there, and it's never going to be perfect. Like, there's nothing, like our greatest hits have still always had, but you could have. Well, and it's okay. We've done what we can do. On the next one, we will get better. But yeah, you've got to finish it. That is a really important point. Is a lot of artists, they hide under the guise of perfectionism. It's not quite right. It's not quite tweet. At some point, just push it out. Go to the next thing, because then you can get better at the next thing.
It's a good point. I think we've spent a lot of time talking about the past and some of the things we have done.
Okay.
I'd like to know a little bit about what is next for you, Tomiwa. So either from personal perspective or from a career Big Cabal perspective, what's next for you?
I think there's a lot left to do at Big Cabal. To borrow from Jeff Bezos, it's still day one. I look at Africa's media landscape, and I think that we are really just getting started. I look at the business and covering technology, and I think that it's still in its infancy. Like, we're still in a very, very early throes of African tech, and so there's a lot to come. And as a publication covering the technology industry, there's a lot of room. Still super excited about Zikoko and the work that they do, and there's a lot of stories that we're not telling. There's a lot of room for us to grow. So super excited about that. Lots of publications, lots of ideas, lots of projects in the wings. Things, and I mean, it sometimes takes so long to bring your ideas to life. So there's things that have been on our boards for 4 years that we've executed for the first time this year. And there's a lot more in that vault of ideas that is waiting to be executed. So I think I'm a Big Cabal. I think professionally, growing that, building that into the behemoth it could be is the work. On a personal level, married, I have kids. I have 2-year-olds. They're amazing, and so watching them grow is a big focus. Married life and wonderful wife. That's a big focus outside of this. But I think always growth. I mean, I've talked about restlessness and I think there's a great deal of that at work, but also in life as well. It's like, how do we make things better in the country that we live? How do we make things better in our society? And that is stuff that keeps me up at night and sort of keeps me looking for the opportunities to change things and to make things better. So, hopefully that's not too abstract.
No, it's not. It's not. It's actually perfect. Well, thank you very much for sharing your story. You've gone through your childhood, gone through a lot of the decisions you made to get you to where you are, a lot of the trials and errors that you learned from. I think a lot of what we're trying to do with my innovation story is actually be able to capture a lot of what you shared today from a personal perspective, but also from a business perspective. And I think, honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better guest. Thank you so much. Genuinely, I'm so happy.
During the conversation, so thank you for having me.
So on a parting note, I would like to ask, is there anything else for anyone out there that we maybe might not have touched on, any lessons or words of advice, or any questions you wish I asked that I didn't get around to?
I think we should leave it on the note of the work. We all have a limited time here. Try to make it mean something, and try to leave the world a better place for you having been here. I think that's important. That's it. I ain't got nothing more.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
And for everyone listening, thank you for joining and wait until the end. See you in the next episode. Take care.